How you doing, guys? Eric from wasteland.com. So before we get officially started, I wanted to remind you guys that for everyone on the Patreon paid subscribers, I'll be giving away two winners. So not just giving away two, but guaranteed two different winners for these. It's like a Pelican case. It's called a Kong case, brand new, waterproof, airtight, shock resistant. You can use it for whatever you want. There's one that's like hypercolor green, the one that's like this gunmetal, almost like dark olive drab. So anyone who's on the Patreon by the end of the month, they eligible to win one of those Kong cases. So this will probably be a relatively quick one tonight. I just wanted to go over some stuff I've been seeing about the crazy stuff that people are expecting for the inauguration, among other things. We got six people, and let me know if you seen any in particular. I know a lot of people in general. Um, what's up, Mr. Phil? Thank you for saying that everything is working. There's this running joke in like the preparedness that like nothing ever happens. And it's kind of true and also completely untrue. It's weird because any of these official dates, events, almost none of that ever does happen. But there's a constant stream of stuff that does happen that preparedness is, would be much better idea. Like the wildfires, like decline of the dollar in general, course all over the world, not just in the US. I can only really speak from a US perspective, but obviously look at what's going on in Ukraine, social unrest in other countries, all sorts of stuff that you can prepare for, natural disasters. So like there's stuff happening constantly throughout even recent history, but certainly just throughout history. But any of these like actual events that people think are going to be meaningful almost never are, which is really interesting. So at least the dates don't specifically line up. Like you can predict, like, okay, things are getting a little hairy. We're much more likely to have events, and you can see that with things like the New Orleans recent terror attack, um, stuff that's going on in Iran with Israel. But any of these, if they're like this date, almost never seems to happen. Stab Joe says word on the street: Trump to be inaugurated at midnight due to protest concerns. Again, word on the street. Yeah, I have heard that they might officially do it. Not publicly, and I'm not sure if that means that they're still going to do the public ceremony or if they would just want to be able to say, hey, it's done, so you can't interrupt it. This is all ceremonial now. It's already too late. Um, or if they just want to do it privately and then see if anything happens last minute. We've seen a lot of security ramp ups. That makes sense, obviously. I mean, there's multiple assassination attempts have already happened on the guy. So we've seen like new anti-drone technology on his motorcade. When he was getting off the aircraft recently, it was super dark. I think that was on purpose, strangely enough, to like prevent any attempts. They moved the inauguration indoors for weather, all sorts of stuff like that. Crazy stuff going on in Europe, Romania, Hungary, Germany, France. Yeah, I mean, South Korea, president was like arrested. Stuff happening all over the world that is makes it really, really strange. There's people claiming that, like the one guy who's supposedly like, I don't even think he says he's a prophet, but he's like says that, God is talking to him. That predicted that Trump would get like shot at or near the ear. He had kind of predicted New York, or not New York, but New Orleans and Vegas terror attacks, which one isn't really even necessarily considered a terror attack. But he'd also said that there was supposed to be something in Nashville. He's saying that he had like a vision of um, dump trucks with anfo bombs in them, like fuel, ammonium nitrate, fuel oil, like Oklahoma City, um, done at the Capitol or somewhere in Washington D.C., presumably around the um, inauguration. What do you think is the bigger threat? China invading Taiwan and starting war, or Putin using nukes? I don't think Putin has a lot to gain from using nukes at all, especially right now when it seems that the incoming administration is admitting that Ukraine is not willing to put more resources in Ukraine. So Russia has effectively won in Ukraine. Uh, Obviously, that could be thrown out of whack if these negotiations for exactly what they get out of it, you know, reach a standstill. But they have zero incentive right now to escalate. And I think Russia is never going to use them unless it is like existential or they are, extremely provoked. They've been very, very patient, I think, in terms of dealing with provocations. That, some people could claim that's from a point of weakness, or they know they can't do anything about it. But regardless, they haven't done a lot of much less aggressive things than using nukes that they could have done in terms of, how to attack Ukraine or NATO, how to hurt NATO in Europe and things. They haven't done a lot of that they could do. So I don't think that they would jump right to nukes unless something very serious happened. So I don't think Russia, I think the nuclear event is much more likely to happen in response to like Iran or maybe North Korea type thing or something smuggled into the US, regardless of whether or not it's a false flag of some kind, who knows. But yeah, I don't think Russia at this point in time is really the big threat for using nukes. If they were going to do it, I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't just go full like EMP, just like setting, and it would, if they did set one off, it certainly wouldn't be against the US directly. So in that said, I definitely think China invading Taiwan is much more likely than Putin using nukes. As to whether that's a bigger threat, it certainly isn't as direct of a threat in the short term. I think long term, China invading Taiwan would cause a lot more disruptions in the daily lives of the average American than even a nuke going off somewhere in the US, because that would be like one city potentially, and that would obviously be catastrophic. It would change a lot. But if we start to go, it would depend on what we do about it, I guess, with Taiwan. But even right now, with how much of the semiconductors are made over there, which they are divesting from that, probably knowing that we don't really want to beef with China over Taiwan, just not worth it. Um, and China's in some weird, has a lot of its own economic issues going on. So it's definitely a strange situation. And there's a very interesting, I'm going to try to get him on. I forget the guy's name, but he's one who co-hosts with Rafi Farber. He was talking on, I believe it was on Liberty and Finance, about the interesting position that China would be in, even though they're soaking up a lot of natural resources, including gold, the interesting position that they would be put in if the world was suddenly forced, whether overtly or by uh, backwards by just all the currencies failing, forced into like a gold standard of any kind, that they having all the gold and generally, given the way that our current economic system is set up in this world, that if you're an export economy, having an extremely strong currency would make it is, considered bad for you. And whether or not it's actually bad, it definitely changes the way that your economy works. If you all of a sudden your currency is worth a lot. So what you would be selling stuff for would be like almost nothing to you, even though it means a lot to the other people who are trying to buy stuff. So they could be put in a really weird position that would for a what is currently a export based economy. So I'd like to talk to him about that exactly and see how the ways that could shake out. Because it's never bad, obviously, in a literal sense, to have a bunch of wealth. But if your economy is set up to rely on imports, the government having a bunch of gold isn't necessarily going to be a short-term good thing for a lot of people in the country. So it's an interesting situation, kind of similar to like the whole dollar milkshake theory about how the dollar could strengthen weirdly in the short term, just because of I don't know if I buy into that. I have to study that more as well, but it's certainly one possible short-term outcome at least. But the bottom line for all the economic stuff always comes down to the allocation of the Earth's scarce resources, and the more obfuscations we have, more layers of abstraction on that, the more catastrophic the eventual blow up is going to be as it reverts back to people being like, okay, what do I actually have? What do I actually need? How do I get it? What do I have to do to get it? You're on the wrong account. I don't know what you mean. Good evening. I'm more concerned about stuff popping off here at home, says Barn Owl. Yeah, I mean, obviously there is. What's up, High Desert Pioneer? Let's go. There is huge risk of civil unrest type stuff. I think that's mostly going to be relocated to not just big cities, but a few major cities, like New York, LA, stuff like that. DC, of course, with the inauguration. I don't think it's just something that would be all over the country all at once. You know, so I think in the best situation, if you're like a normal sub, certainly if you're rural, you just want to have make sure you have decent security system. If you're like suburban and not like downtown urban, you just want to make sure you have the ability to not have to leave your house for a while, and like fire suppression type stuff, decent home hardening, and then you would just not engage in any of the shenanigans if at all possible. Not if you don't even have to go to the store or the gas station, all the better. Most of those things would not last more than a few weeks, hopefully. If you're like downtown urban or urban, then you're in a whole other situation. But again, I think the move would just be to set it up so that you don't have to leave your building and hope that it doesn't burn down. Should I paint my roof blue? I've talked about what I think that uh the directed energy weapon explanations for these things are nonsense, and not because I don't think that they don't or couldn't even or don't even already exist. It's just that that's not a good explanation. It doesn't explain why one building could burn down and the one next to it wouldn't. Because even if you like lased it to ash, you're still having a fire there, like I've explained multiple times. So if you could start the fire with a crackhead's pipe or a Jewish space laser, the house is now on fire. So if it's possible for it to burn one house and not the other, then that's possible with or without a laser. Unless people are saying that it's possible to completely laze a house to ash without an actual flame ever appearing, which that doesn't make sense. And also, they supposedly only are using this on American cities, not in Russia, not in Iran, not anywhere else. We're only using it on our own cities to do this. Doesn't make any sense. Laughs in downtown college campus, says Barno. Well, yeah, like I said, that's probably one of the places likely to have protests of some kind, but not necessarily overt unrest. And again, I think the move is just to either have a evacuation slash bug out plan if you get advance notice of something, um, but mostly just to not have to go out through any of this and participate in any of it. Just be able to stay in your room for 72 to hours to a week or something if necessary with water, food, maybe alternate communications, some backup power supplies, stuff like that, and you could avoid a lot of these shenanigans. Sorry. But it's interesting because I guess overall I'm thinking that we probably won't see anything too dramatic happening on Tuesday specifically, and that's just based on my like I said earlier assessment that nothing ever really happens on the actual date. So nothing ever happens, and things are always happening. So none of the things ever happen, but there's always things happening, if I can put it in my own weird way. Decently set up here, says Barno. Good to know. That's awesome. That's all you can do. You can't ever perfectly predict stuff. And the more we try to prepare for any specific scenario, um, like I said, I mentioned to someone, I think it was on Twitter, they were talking about bug out bags. I'm like, man, bug out bags or plans, like survival plans, other than just a commonality preparedness type stuff, any specific survival preparedness bug out plan is either going to make you look like a genius or a retard, and it's going to be 100% dependent on you know, just what happens. And some people are just going to get completely lucky that they will have planned for something that turns out to happen that way. I don't think it's really possible to accurately predict a lot of this stuff. As I pointed out with my attempt to track people's predictions and just see how bogus they are, all you can see is focus on the things that you think are more likely, and then try to wrap those into a holistic preparedness plan that will cover as many possible scenarios and some of the more dangerous scenarios, or at least the more dangerous elements of them, even if you think they're unlikely. And versatility and flexibility is usually going to be, and speed, the ability to find out, keep track of information, and act on it when you see it happening, instead of necessarily trying to predict what's going to happen. Because well, that's awesome if you can do it. It's so hard, especially when you're trying to predict the timelines of any of this stuff. Um, but staying on top of it so we can tell when it's happening, even if it's already officially started. Like think about the people that were able to get out of Ukraine in the first few hours, like they actually made it out. Whereas people who were like, well, not really up to speed, or just didn't really believe it or want to believe it, or just frozen by fear, or didn't have enough of their stuff staged ready to go ahead of time, they were stuck. So you're never going to be able to predict that stuff to the actual day. So you have to either act way early and be okay with that, or just try to act as soon as possible. There will be a wake up call in Ukraine. I think there's already been a wake up call in Ukraine for anyone who's paying attention. Jason says lasers from space wouldn't be very effective anyway. The atmosphere is a tough adversary. Yeah, and I mean, I would have to do the math to see like the amount of energy that a laser would have to produce to laze like acres of buildings, and then a satellite the right size, the battery, or power generation that would have to be on it. Like I don't even know if that's exists yet. And like I said, even if it does, it's irrelevant to the point as to like the supposed evidence that directed energy weapons were used. Is that like this house didn't burn down, this trash can didn't burn down, whatever. And like I said, that's irrelevant to how the fire was started. Obviously, the house burned down, regardless of how the fire was started, and obviously the trash can didn't melt. And it wasn't because it was blue. It was just because of some other reason. Maybe it was full of soggy material. Maybe the wind just whipped around it, whatever. The house was on fire, regardless of how it was started. So there obviously are alternate explanations. The lasers are being used from planes. Like I said, I don't know. I don't buy that explanation for the fires. I think that technology is always obviously being worked on, and but you can just try to calculate the amount of energy that would have to be produced to like laze a building to ash, and then let alone acres and acres of buildings. And if you're thinking that they're just trying to start the fire with them, then why the hell do they need a plane flying around with a directed energy weapon? We saw people starting those fires on video with, lighters. Do you see the Blue W van that survived the LA fires? Yeah, I saw like that, and someone else pointed out a trash can, but I also saw a lot of things that didn't burn down. Some people's houses that they soaked with water didn't burn down. Random things just don't burn down, and that's fire patterns are weird sometimes, and I don't think that is that hard to explain. I've seen some fires do some weird things in real life that didn't make any sense, just based on wind and stuff like that, or things that had, like I said, a certain amount of moisture or materials that may have, like, there's all sorts of weird stuff that can happen. But yeah, so obviously I would be ready for disruptions on Tuesday. Like I said, be prepared mentally and logistically to not have to leave your area for um, a few days. Or if you are in a particularly dangerous area, be especially ready to leave if you can do it up. But that's one of those things like if you have to either get out right away or not try to get out at all. Because if you try to get out a little bit late, it's going to be way worse than just staying there because then you're going to have to get out through the worst of it, which is obviously the third best option. Need to go GMO chickens blue. Yeah, just make everything blue, see if it works, right? Easier to start fires using a Biden torch. But yeah, I am curious to see how many of these things are going to, like the Ukraine negotiation, deportation negotiations. We're still hearing that they're supposed, like I am not that optimistic that they're actually going to do mass deportations. And I don't, like I've said before, I don't think that it's strictly speaking necessary to do direct deportations if you control employment, housing, social benefits, driver's license, stuff like that. If you actually make it and enforce it at the business side of it, not at the individual side. So like someone trying to get an illegal immigrant trying to get a job, that don't have to even enforce that. If you enforce it at the business, like if you knowingly hire someone who's legal immigrant, then these massive fines of business, lose your business license or whatever. Certainly don't give away driver's licenses or any sort of identification, or certainly no government money or phones. And if you do all that, there's no way to survive except as an actual homeless person. If you can't rent an apartment or anything, if you can't get a job, if you can't get a driver's license, if you can't get any food stamps or housing benefits or medical care or any of this stuff without citizenship, then the problem solves itself very quickly. People either self-deport or they stop coming, or they're eventually picked up for doing something of those things illegally and then deported. But you don't just have to do these initial mass deportations. And that's not to say that I think that it would be a bad thing. I just think it would be expensive. It would be logistically difficult. It could be very bad optics. Because the people are going to ham up the crying families and whatnot, but it's a major problem that we've allowed to happen, and it's obviously in a situation where um, there are no good, easy outcomes. But I think if you control all that on just stopping the flow of money, that will solve the problem pretty quickly in and of itself. And it'll make it so it's not uh, even something that people try to do, really. A phosphorus grenade will definitely start a fire that would not go out. Well, the grenade itself won't go out. The fire, once it's burns out, but yeah, white phosphorus or thermite or something like that. But you don't need to. I mean, it was unmanaged brush, uh, restricted at least. You know, they weren't necessarily out of water, but because of they had a lot less in reservoirs, so access to a lot less water. And people are pointing out like, oh, it wouldn't have mattered anyway when it's this big. If you even like, okay, so that's not a good reason to not those reservoirs and fire hydrants are there for a reason. They may have been able to at least soak some buildings and save some buildings. And that combined with brush management and not having homeless people everywhere smoking crack and cooking cats and dogs or whatever in the brush could have prevented this from happening or at least spreading as quickly. You know, maybe when it's super windy, these embers don't land and start another fire in another place. They're able to at least have it contained, stuff along those lines. There's never a good reason not to do things best to the best of our ability, especially with the amount of taxes that people are paying in California. It's so absurd. Just absolutely, absolutely, utterly wasted, completely wasted, total disaster. Um, there's just no excuse for the hemorrhaging. That's why anyone who talks about the tax side of it, like the people not paying their fair share or whatever, is just you're basically financially illiterate because there is no end to the amount of money that they can waste. And you could take every penny of everyone's money and the government wouldn't be able to solve these problems. It would just get hemorrhaged away. I mean, if you took you can actually run the numbers, and if you take all these billionaires who are supposedly not paying their fair share, you take every single penny that every all the 800 billionaires have over, I think, like $100 million. So you let them keep $100 million. You take everything else, every penny, and even not accounting for how destructive that would be because it's all companies that you'd have to somehow liquidate and the value would go down. You wouldn't actually get that money anyway. But let's say you magically got the money at full value and the government got it all. Everything every billionaire has. So Elon Musk's 300, 500 billion, he now has 100 million. Bill Gates, 150 billion or whatever, he now only has 100 million. So billions and billions, trillions of dollars. It would last like 8 months or something, maybe a year of government spending. Everyone's paid not only their fair share, they've given you basically everything they own, and the government wouldn't even be able to last like 2 years. So it's just a nonsense argument. The problem is not the tax revenue, it's the spending. SBQR says California is a second world country with the veneer of first world status. Yeah, it's like the culture or the whatever exists in California is like a parasite just living in the husk of a former civilization because they can't even keep it operational, you know? And that's happening all over the US, unfortunately. And that's one of the main problems why with immigration is you have different cultures coming in and just kind of living off of things that existed and not caring about the same things, not supporting the same things, using a lot of social services exploitatively. Um, and like, I mean, mathematically exploitatively, it's just like Social Security. There's a equivalent of that for all these social programs, and it's just that which can't last forever will not last forever. And I think we're getting, unfortunately, pretty close to the end of this experiment. But does that mean it couldn't last another 10 years, especially if Trump does a few things right? Now, I honestly do think, though, that we are at the point in this decline that even doing the right things can hasten a lot of problems. Now, that doesn't mean it's not the right thing, but similar to the example that everyone always is used, like a drug addict. Like stopping taking the drugs is the right thing to do, but it will cause some immediate, second order effects that are incredibly painful and possibly even deadly. And we let ourselves get into that position economically and culturally too, which if we like to cut government spending, like they always talk about Doge, that's a huge amount of the economy is government spending. So while that shouldn't be the case, and that shouldn't be how we measure economic success, is just how much money the government's pumping into the economy, it is currently just like they always say, don't feed the animals because they can't get food on their own. Well, the government's been feeding the economy too much, and now it doesn't know how to get operate on its own. So if you cut government spending by 2 trillion or whatever Elon Musk's want to do, which absolutely needs to happen eventually, that's $2 trillion that's not going somewhere in the economy to, even if it's, being wasted, it's still going in, complete bribes and pork spending and just government bureaucrats. Like that's still money that's going then to their rent, then to the stock market, then to their kids' private school, then to these clothing companies, then to their, you know, maids and everything. So regardless of the point that that's not how the economy should be working. It is how it's working. So taking that amount of spending out would absolutely cause a temporary contraction in economic activity. And especially because that's basically the only thing that, Keynesian economists care about, it would cause a huge contraction in everything that's going on, which then would kind of snowball, decreases tax revenue, causes the problems to become even greater. So, yeah, pain train is definitely coming, as the High Desert Pioneer says. Definitely. So, all we can do is prepare physically, medicines, food, ammunition, and protective device. I just bought a recent storage unit and I got excited because the guy had like 50 rounds of 9mm hollow point in there, and I was like, "Ooh, maybe I'll get a gun in here." But alas, no gun, just some ammo. But even 50 rounds of hollow point ammunition is, $25 or something. If you cut off social services, you'd have another Great Depression. Absolutely. I mean, the amount people have no idea the extent to which the country's current existence is based on government money going out through food stamps or direct, you know, payments for housing supplementation, Section 8, various types of tax credits, but even just the direct money like food and food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, um, housing benefits, all that stuff, and then the government jobs themselves, even like VA stuff. Like like the VA is not able to exist independently of government spending, of course. So it's just so much government spending. You cut off social services, and it would be like Sarajevo or Mogadishu out here really quick because there would just be millions and millions of people who are not at all prepared to do without the systems of support, and it would get really bad. Insane amounts of crime, insane amounts of poverty. At that point, you would actually have people starving to death. And that's why I think that's one of my main reasons why I think that they will never go the depressionary route. They will always go the inflationary melt up route because they'll just be there's too much destructive pressure the other way. They lose power. Even if the money's worthless, people still have to rely on the government and for their meager amounts of worthless money. They'll always be asking for more and everything, but they have to go that route. HTP says we'll be all be on soup kitchen status soon enough. Yeah, what's interesting is that there's, especially on Twitter recently, there's been the boomers are at it again, arguing about how like back in my day I had because they see all at this point it's like the Zoomers, not even the millennials, complaining about how things are worse or different, or whatever, and they don't even really understand the argument because I've seen people get on there and say like, I had to drive a $25 car and then when that broke, I had to buy a $50 car. And I'm like, you don't even see, you have to be so tone deaf to not even realize, to completely miss the argument like that, because no one is saying, but we all had to drive beaters. We all had shitty first cars, not all of us, but I certainly did. And the point is not that Zoomers or millennials or anyone are saying that we shouldn't have to have shitty first cars. It's that ours are not $50. Our shitty car was $1,000. At least mine was. The current, 15-year-old, if they want the shittiest beater out there, they're gonna have to pay $2,500 or $3,000 just to get the shittiest running car. And you can't even fix it now, like the way you could back then, because you need sensors and calibratory tools and everything. You need to pass smog checks and everything. And so the boomer coming out and saying, I had to do a $50 car. You should pay your dues and be lucky. It's like, yeah, that car you could get with a week's wages. Now it takes, 6 months or 2 years of wages at minimum wage practically to get the shittiest car. So yeah, it's not about the fact that the kids don't want to do anything difficult. It's just that even if you do, we all have to do all the difficult things, and then you don't have a pat. It's more expensive in terms of labor and things like that than it was for him to get the $50 car. Not only is it nominally, obviously, 20 to 100 times more expensive, it's more expensive in terms of the actual amount of labor that you have to sell typically to get that. And that's not the only thing that's more expensive. Everything else is too. And then you also don't have as, a real hope for just getting on this path that could offer some high chance of middle class success. 73 Plymouth Fury. And yeah, I had a 1980 Ford Courier. It was like the shittiest car in my entire high school. Totally clapped out. It was like 800 bucks. But that was back when minimum wage was, I started working at McDonald's just so I could buy a car for, um, it was like 5.90, so like $6 an hour. So that was still 150 hours, right, to buy that. And it's gotten more expensive. So I think minimum wage when, back when cars were $25, it probably took a week, instead of a month's worth of wages at full-time minimum wage, it could probably have been done in a week. So things are more expensive for sure. And there's some arguments you could make in the other direction that if you wanted to actually compare comparable, lifestyles, that the houses back then were, two bedroom, one bath, 900 square feet. They didn't have internet. They didn't have cell phones. The cars, were very, very simple, that sort of thing. And that's true. But unfortunately, nowadays you can't even, with the exception of the houses that maybe you can find some cheaper ones if you go, really far into the ghetto, you're not actually even able to avoid getting a lot of those other things. The cars have restrictions on how simple they can be. You have to get smog checks. They can't even make, they're not even legally allowed to make new cars that simple anymore. Um, you pretty much have to have a cell phone internet. You can't do anything. Like literally, you go to do anything, you have to make an account for it, use an email, use a cell phone. You have to do two-factor authentication to use it all, to get a job, to get a paycheck, any of that stuff. So it's very difficult to actually avoid any of that stuff, even if you really wanted to. It can be done cheaper, but the point is that all of these things are still more expensive in terms of how much work it takes to get them, even though they're um, I mean, even it's not just nominal terms, it's real terms, which is the important part. And we all had to drive shitty first trucks. You got a 1994 Bronco. Oh, nice. I just sold my 94 Bronco. It was a 19, yeah, it was a 94, and I just sold it trade in for my current car, which is awesome. Much newer, has AC. Even though I love the Bronco, it was not something I could daily drive. Slab City soon for all, potentially. But yeah, it's interesting. So I certainly hope there's something that happens on Tuesday, right? It is Tuesday, the 20th? No, Monday. Is that when the inauguration is? Is tomorrow? I don't know what day it is. Don't know what day it is. How are the Ravens doing, by the way? I need them to lose. Oh, close one. I need the Bills to win. 25-27 with a minute and a half to go. Looking good. But yeah, so obviously I still think, and I've been saying this for months and months, I still think the biggest problem for most of us, for just Americans, I mean, is going to be economic. And I think that if I had to choose at this point between like a decked out homestead or a bunch of gold, I'd probably have to go with the gold, but that'd be a tough decision. I really do want a decked out homestead. But I think that for most people in most situations, the financial element is going to be the more important one. Hopefully, we can do both self-sufficiency and have some financial stability. But yeah, tomorrow at 11 a.m. So I'll try to be awake. Is that EST? Chickens laying overtime. Yeah, eggs are expensive. You made money in Detroit losing. I lost money on that one. That was a complete freak show, I think. Freak event. A 10-point favorite losing by like 14. Huge swing, but good luck or a good call on that one. Chickens laying overtime. Someone just asked me, they're like, eggs are so expensive. Do you still have chickens? I'm like, man, not out here in the desert. I miss it though, just the ability to convert. I talked about this in the last live stream, the ability to convert basically trash, something that you can't use, into awesome eggs that are now very, very expensive. I can't buy the abused chicken eggs anymore. I just can't bring myself to do it. So I have to buy the happy eggs. and I buy them when I try to get them when they have the sales and they're only like $6 a dozen for the pasture raised eggs. But yeah, it's pretty absurd. Those boomers with $50 cars never had to pay an hour of labor for a dozen eggs. But it's a weird situation. So, what do you guys think is going to happen tomorrow? Anything? Nothing? Let me know. And obviously, I would avoid DC. I certainly wouldn't go to any of those parties or anything. It's just not worth it. Um, but I don't necessarily think that there's a huge risk of anything going to happen, especially because they will be obviously ramping up security quite significantly during that next couple days. And already, we know that they're already doing some pretty extensive security enhancements. Looks like Buffalo pulled it off. Nice. Nice. Got that one. Got him. I don't really care one way or the other about Ravens or Buffaloes, but I just had a wee little bet on uh Buffaloes. I needed that to happen. And last night too, Marab at the UFC helped me out, saved my night. Bringing gas masks to work tomorrow. Not a bad idea to have things in your car, especially if you're in an area that is not likely to get smash and grabbed. And if it is, and you want to secure it so it can't be seen, can't be yanked out of there, maybe with like a cable lock or something like that. But not a bad idea to have basics, stuff like get home type stuff in your truck, like obviously self-defense implements if possible and feasible, and if not, at least have like some pepper spray, a knife, basic get home bag, gas mask, or some kind of fire hood even, and maybe even like a plate carrier or defensive gear if you can't actually have a firearm. Wouldn't be a bad idea. And then also to have a plan and routes and everything on how to get home if you have to abandon your vehicle, that sort of thing. It's -15 tomorrow, so ain't nobody doing anything in Wisconsin. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it is true that it's going to be extremely cold in DC too. So I don't think that's, uh, I doubt that that's the only reason or even the main reason why they're moving it indoors. It does seem probably related to security because they've been tightening up more and more elements of it and dropping off more and more things. So it definitely seems to be security related, maybe to have a specific threat. Yeah. Dust masses does it. Yeah, you'll get the sharp dust boogers and everything. Really not great. Um, that I always keep basic. No, I wouldn't even call it preps, but just basic supplies. Have some Kleenex and stuff in the car. I think the idiots will get cold feet and not do anything. We can hope. We can certainly hope. Certainly hope so. But I appreciate you guys watching. Like I said, if you jump on the Patreon, you got these pretty awesome Kong cases. Getting rid of two of these. Two different winners will be selected. And as long as you are um, any level paid Patreon member, by the end of the month, you will be entered. Number of entries you get depends on your tier, and really good shot because I still think there's only 14 people. I think there's like 115, 110 or something entries total. So really not that bad of a shot, especially when two people are winning. So cheers, everybody. Stay safe and make sure you got all your, stuff topped off, but I wouldn't be too worried unless you're, like I said, downtown, big city. And then just make sure you keep your ear to the ground and weapons loaded and your gas tanks topped off and all that. But I'm not expecting anything too significant, hopefully. So.